CSUN 2019 with Ted Gies from Elsevier and our very own Øystein Moseng. Thank you so much for joining us for a little chit-chat.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
What does accessibility mean at Elsevier?
So accessibility at Elsevier is a crucial component of our product development. We publish 500,000 articles a year in journals, and we are one of the largest publishers in science, technology, and health. So to make sure all of that content is accessible as possible is crucial. I mean, there's a huge amount of the population who cannot read from the printed page. So, I mean, I feel a great responsibility to make sure that the content we publish is accessible to everyone, including people with disabilities.
So how did you end up working with Highsoft?
Well, it's all about bugging the right people, and I mean, already I know that Highsoft has a really cool feature where you can kind of you can submit a comment for new features, and I found that. I said, you know, I'm gonna suggest that they really enhance their accessibility support. You know, we at Elsevier already use Highcharts in a few of our products. We would really like our entire products to be accessible, including the Highchart. So, actually, it didn't take long until I found the right person, which was Øystein, and I got a very lively and I would say friendly email back that says, yeah, let's maybe work on accessibility. What are your initial ideas to improve? And it kind of started from there.
So Øystein, tell me more about what it was like to work with Elsevier and what they brought to the table.
I remember when we got that email, we were really eager to jump on that because at the time we had a little bit of accessibility features with regards to color blindness. We had support for data tables, but that was about as far as it went, right? And I remember you guys framing this like you had a team of experts. We got a lot of expert help there immediately, and basically got a head start on accessibility from our end.
So tell me, what were some of the technical challenges you were facing looking at existing solutions and how to improve on them?
I think one of the biggest problems initially was just the lack of documentation, the lack of standards around what it takes to make not only an accessible SVG graphic, but also an accessible chart. Because what you're talking about is really structured information, and although there is the wonderful W3C WAI initiative that tells you very specifically how to make your web applications accessible, they really don't have much to offer in terms of how to make a structured SVG. And let's face it, all chart and visualization, especially if it's an SVG, is structured data. So really in the beginning, we very much went into it not knowing hardly anything about the subject space. We did look at other approaches. The Yahoo user interface library, they used one approach for SVG accessibility in their chart library. We realized IBM Rave had their own solution, but after evaluating what they were doing, we really, I guess we would say we weren't satisfied with the way they were approaching things.
And I think the other big technical challenge for us was really compatibility with the different browsers and the different assistive technologies. SVG accessibility is such a cutting-edge thing, right? Mm-hmm. So there was really no resources for us to play off of when it comes to what actually works today.
Yeah, the concept of, you know, what is truly accessibility supported. So, you know, you can develop something towards standards, and especially if you're looking at the very next level standards, all the assistive technology, all the screen readers, the voice input, there's no guarantee that it's going to work what you come up with. So we really had to prove that we could come up with something that was accessibility supported. So we experimented with a lot of different assistive technology, a lot of different screen readers, you know, JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver, using a variety of browsers.
So tell us about some of the surprises that you uncovered as you were doing user testing on the accessibility module.
I think the obvious one there is that the that the screen reader user wants to know everything, and that they want to know everything at the point where it's happening. So we were way too verbose, I think, in the beginning. We didn't necessarily consider the fact that these people are just as impatient as us, right? And you're skim reading all the time. You want to get to the content that's relevant to you, and that's when you want to spend that extra time. So that was really eye-opening for me, at least, when we did the user testing portion of things.
Yeah, I would say another assumption would be that there's this accepted concept, especially if you read some of the documentation by the standards makers, people like the W3C, the Diagram Center. It's kind of like if you have a visualization or a complex graphic, that a data table is a sufficient alternative. So we very much challenge that assumption. The thing is, we didn't want a screen reader user to come across a Highcharts graph and get some inferior user experience, and then, oh wow, okay, they have a table after all this nonsense,
Yeah.
and now I'm happy. So we wanted to make an accessible chart in addition to the table, so really users could, in a way, choose what fit their needs the best.
So, Øystein, tell us a little bit about what's actually happening under the hood of the Highcharts Accessibility module.
Okay, so our charts are created using SVG. And the great thing about SVG is it supports ARIA, which stands for Accessible Rich
Internet applications.
Yeah, there you go. And in theory, that's supposed to be a way for us to mark up parts of websites or parts of web pages that aren't inherently accessible to the screen reader in such a way that the screen reader can understand them, and that's what we're doing with our charts. So we're making sure that the screen reader is able to navigate the individual elements of the charts, that they're able to help our screen reader users get that overview of the chart and get into those details of the chart that they want to explore.
You know, to build on what Øystein said about ARIA, ARIA has traditionally been applied to what would you call standard HTML widgets. Designers, they come up with a specific user interface. You can't build that with traditional HTML, so they have to build it from scratch. And that's kind of the reason why ARIA was invented, is because there's all of these custom UI components coming out. So the chart library, we kind of didn't know if the ARIA application would work when we first started looking at this. We very much went in just, let's try some different things. Let's try some different ARIA roles, some different ARIA labels. And I think after some trial and error, and with talking to real screen reader users, people who are blind use assistive technology to navigate the web, we came up with what we think is a very viable and understandable solution.
Absolutely.
So tell us about some of the surprises that you uncovered as you were doing user testing on the accessibility module.
So I think the biggest question we had when we went in for the user testing was, is this going to be better than tables?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was happily surprised to find out that a lot of people thought it was.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
When we first started talking to end users about Highcharts, I would say we didn't know what to expect, right? I was actually kind of nervous because we had put in a lot of effort and trial and error. We thought we came up with a pretty good screen reader solution with putting in accessible names and labels to data points. We put in some directions on how to use our accessible Highcharts. But nice surprise for us was that some users, we actually had real users who relied on screen readers, people who are blind. They went through our Highcharts, and they would go through the Highchart version that had the accessibility module. Then they'd go through the table version, and we were pleasantly surprised that some rated the SVG Highcharts accessibility version higher in usability and understandability over the table version. So that was not everybody, but some of them. Yeah. And an interesting thing that we found was, we mentioned this in our CSUN talk today, was that when you get beyond a certain level of complexity in your table, the accessible SVG becomes more preferable, because in essence the screen reader user has less of a cognitive burden to kind of piece together what the table cell
You get
means.
everything that is relevant to the context of that data point at the same time, right?
Yeah, you don't have to memorize the table reading command so that you hear all of the headings and subheadings read together. And users really liked some of that heavy lifting of understanding what each data point meant.
And I think also just the conceptual idea of I'm navigating a chart.
Yeah.
That can also help you sort of visualize what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that for each chart type, so whether it be like a pie, a column, a box plot, I mean, we say right away what kind of chart it is. We tell people if it's a bar chart, how many bars, if it's a line chart, how many line series. And we kind of give we help along that mental model right away. And I think that also makes their intention of why they chose that very apparent to maybe somebody who can't see.
Exactly.
So we had one user who was blind and was using a screen reader. They had no idea that they were about to experience their very first accessible pie chart. So they came across the pie chart and they said, "Oh wow, that's amazing. You guys get a 5.5 out of 5 for usability. I've never experienced an accessible pie chart before.
Right.
The fact that it told me how many slices and the percentages. He said, I've never seen that before. That's pretty damn good."
What are the next challenges that you're going to take on when it comes to developing the Highcharts Accessibility module?
So what's going to decide on where we're going next is really the feedback we get from users, I think, first of all.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things we would like to explore. There are interesting things happening in haptics, for example. Everybody now has a touch screen on their mobile with vibration capabilities. And of course, we think sonification is one of those areas where we can also take a concept that's been maybe available in academia for a long time and bring it out to the masses, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think we've just scratched the surface with voice input support. If you're a nuanced Dragon user or a Windows speech recognition user, since Highcharts supports keyboard input commands very well, that means that the keyboard emulation commands in those speech engines also works with Highcharts. So you can basically use all the interactive features right now with voice input. But we're trying to improve that. We're trying to make it so that you can basically speak the accessible name of any control and click something very quickly just with voice.
Another interesting point here is AI, right? So automated descriptions being maybe the most obvious one there.
Yeah.
So I think as that gets more mature and as that gets more widely accepted, we're going to have to incorporate that in our products.
One of the challenges, one of the user needs that we haven't necessarily cracked fully is for large data sets, especially, how do you succinctly describe the main trends and the nature of a visualization in a meaningful way to maybe somebody who's blind? And somebody who's blind does not have time to listen to 1,000 data points and kind of figure out how the trend goes up or down. So we're looking at different ways to possibly tease out the main themes. Maybe it's an AI application.
Yeah, and it goes back to the whole out-of-the-box idea as well, right?
Yeah.
So we want this. I mean, right now you can put in a human-created description.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people working on guidelines for what's the best way to create human descriptions of visualizations, but we want to do that job for the users if we can. Right?
Yes.
So Øystein, tell us, what does it take technically for a client to implement the Highcharts Accessibility module?
Consciously, we've gone for as little effort as possible there. So if you're one of our cloud users, you don't have to do anything. And if you're one of our programming API users, it's a matter of one line of JavaScript, right? So we recognize that most of our chart creators are probably not going to be accessibility experts, right? But we can help out by having a module that helps create the most accessible chart possible out of the box.
And so one line of JavaScript gets you the basic screen reader compatibility and
It gets you screen reader compatibility, it gets you keyboard navigation, it gets you voice input support, right? It gets you access to the Sonification API, right? You have the whole set of features there.
why'd you make it so easy for people?
Because we're nice people.